All right, while we on you, baby, with the tank. '17, 18, took us to New Orleans. 200 slaves who could be so mean. Then they got me up, it's from where we came. Shipped in slave train to the Congo plain. Got our culture at the barrel of a gun. Erased our name, we still got our drum. We got our dance, we got our song. We got a slave 6 days, we're working hard and long. But Sunday, that is our day. We're gonna dance and sing our troubles away. Dance the Shango underneath the sun. We're gonna wake the spirit when you play your drum. That's the Linda on Congo Square. A bamboola like you just don't care. The Linda on Congo Square. Bamboola like you just don't care. At the barrel of a gun, erased our name, we still got our drum. We got our dance, we got our song. Got a basic days, working hard and long. But Sundays, that is our day. We're gonna dance and sing our troubles away. We ain't planting no rice, we ain't shucking no corn. We're gonna dance our dance and sing our song. Dance with Shango underneath the sun. We're gonna wave the spirit when we play the drum. That's a Linda on Congo Square. Bamboola like you just don't care. Bamboola, 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 bamboola.
And that was Congo Square by poet Chuck Perkins, performed by poet Chuck Perkins with the Melody Makers. And today on our call, we've got a special guest, none other than Chuck Perkins. He's agreed to join us and talk about New Orleans today, New Orleans right after the levee failures. And we're doing this sort of as a rent party to raise awareness and encourage people to contribute, donate, help out in any way they can with the current Haitian relief efforts after Hurricane Matthew. It's possible some people might be hearing this months, maybe even years later. So I just want to say, unfortunately, in our lifetime, there'll never be a time when Haiti doesn't need help. A lot of that has to do with history. We're going to get into that, a little bit of that history at some point in the call. The group that I like, and I've worked with them for over 10 years, is called Lambie Fund. The Lambie Fund, LAMBIFUND.org. And you can look into it for yourself, but it's a group that lives in Haiti, and they work in rural areas, and they focus on community building and economic development. They do things like building mills and reforestation projects and helping with agriculture, local agriculture, things that the people in the countryside really, really need. So anyway, hey, Chuck, welcome, and thanks for joining us on this call.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you for having me.
Well, the first time I heard Chuck's work, I was in New York, and I was listening to the internet radio and listening to WOZ. Is that right? That's what they call the station.
Yeah, WWOZ.
WWOZ. And this voice, it just blasted onto the radio, and it was an amazing song, and we're going to, poem song that we're going to play at the very end of this. It's based on Little Liza Jane, which basically tells the entire story, or a lot of it, of the rebuilding of New Orleans in the very early days after the terrible flooding that took place there. And it's just such, I still, 10 years later, just feel it's just such a powerful piece. And if anybody wants to get a feeling for the spirit of New Orleans and how New Orleans brought itself back together and the important role musicians played and other artists, that song just tells the whole story. It's quite amazing. So, Chuck, you're a native to New Orleans, yeah?
Yeah, born and raised. I got out a little bit. After high school, I went to the Marine Corps for 3 years, and also after college, I moved up to Chicago for about 10 years. But of my 51 years, I've spent all of the other years right here in the swamp down here in New Orleans.
And I know in New Orleans, which ward you come from, it makes a difference. It matters.
That's right. I tell people all the time, I'm a P-Town Prince, 17 Ward Troubadour, Uptown Renaissance man.
There you go. That's good geography for anybody that needs to figure out where Chuck's coming from. Yeah, and so what Chuck does, and we heard some of it already, Congo Square, I mean, one of the things he does, and he does a lot of different things, which we're going to get into on the call, but he uses poetry and music to basically tell the story of New Orleans, going right back to the very beginning, which, of course, Congo Square covers that, how New Orleans came to be, the unique spirit in New Orleans, what makes it different from other places, and then the story of the post-storm, and the rebuilding, and then a lot of other topics, too, but we're just going to focus on those particular things tonight. So when did you get the idea, A, to be a poet, and B, to back up your poetry with music the way you do?
Well, I think, sometimes I think I remember once someone asking Michael Jackson about, like, dancing, and they were asking about certain moves that he does, like, when does he know to do that? And he just says that, it's like dancing has just always been a part of him, and it's one of those things that you feel and you do it. And so it's the same thing about me. I probably wanted to be a poet, as almost as long as I can remember, from a very young age. I realized that if I was sitting in class and bored, that I could kind of write and tell stories and create these other worlds and almost escape there, right? And so, I don't think I really began to evolve as a poet until I moved up to Chicago in like about 1992. And one of the reasons is because while I lived in New Orleans, my friendships were mostly based on proximity, like guys I went to school with, guys I grew up nearby. And, of course, I've always lived in these parallel worlds. So, I was sort of odd because as much as I like poetry, I enjoyed football, too. And so most of my friendships were maybe revolved more around football and some of the other things I was doing. And so it was more difficult for me to find like inspiration just from being in proximity with other creative people. But, when I went up to Chicago, you're an adult and you got a blank slate. I mean, you have a chance to pick your friends that's not just based on being in school with them or being on a football team with them or living in a neighborhood with them. I found myself going to places around mostly creative people, and, just being there was fantastic for me because, it's the sort of thing you go someplace and you're in a room full of other people who want to be poets and they're sharing, they're creating, and you're hearing this stuff and you're getting inspired. And as a result, you can't wait to get home to maybe to create something yourself. And now you want to do it even better than you did it before. And so, moving to Chicago really helped in that sense. And then, by the time I got back to New Orleans, it's like even though I was from New Orleans, I was born and raised in New Orleans, and in many ways, like this musical culture, I was impacted in many ways without really knowing it. Like when I was a kid, we were on sports teams, and when we would travel, if we were on a bus or the back of a truck or whatever, or walking someplace, we would sing. We would sing all the way there, and we'd sing all the way back, and most of our songs, they were inspired by, like, Mardi Gras Indian-type New Orleans music. So I was really impacted that way, but still, before I left to go to Chicago, I never really thought about the musicians and this musical history that, as you put it early on, that goes all the way back to Congo Square. I never really thought about it. But once I came back, I was a little older. I wasn't so much interested in the club scene and going here DJs and stuff. And so even though I was from New Orleans and I grew up hearing a lot of these people's music, it was like it was a whole new world for me, getting to, figuring out who, let's say, like a guy like Henry Butler and John Boutte. And, of course, I always knew someone like Dr. John and Professor Longhair, but, the others like Donald Harris and Detroit Brooks. And it was fantastic, this brand new world that had always been, right in front of me. I mean, they were there now, and I was getting to know these guys. And so for me, that musical part was always there because, as I said, the Mardi Gras Indian music influenced me very early on. And so even in my poetry, it had a certain musicality, certain cadence in it. And so by the time I got back, and since I was meeting all those musicians, it was, adding music to my poetry, I think, was a very natural extension.
Gotcha. There's an old joke about fish and water. There's an old fish, and he came across two young fish, and he said, "Hey, how's the water, guys?" And one of the young fish said, "Oh, it's fine." And then when the old guy left, the one little fish said to the other one, "What's water?"
Right.
It's like
right.
You just don't. When you're in it, you don't know it. It's just like the air you breathe. And so, Chicago, I guess, not only gave you an opportunity to, go deep into the creative world without. Because we're all the same. We all grow up in a family and a neighborhood. Sometimes if you leave your neighbors and go off and hang out with other people, they're like, "What's Chuck doing? What is he hanging out with us?" And in Chicago, you were just free to roam around and find people who were doing the same kinds of things that you wanted to do. And then with that spark lit, came back to New Orleans and you saw everything through different eyes.
That's right. And I think, one thing was, being in Chicago, most of my friends were, they were artists, they were painters, they were dancers, they were musicians, and so, I hadn't checked out that much live music in New Orleans prior to leaving after college. But, by the time I come back, I am interested in the real thing, more authentic type stuff. I'm interested in the people who make the music in a way that I wasn't prior to leaving, and so it was like a whole new world, and I had a fantastic time exploring that world and getting to know a lot of people, and it was great, man.
Well, what year did you get back?
I got back in 2000 my family and I moved, my wife and kids, they got back in 2002, but I had accepted a job in Tyler, Texas, and so we had agreed that my wife was working on getting her CPA, and so her and my kids, they moved back here with my in-laws, and I got like a little small place in Tyler, and so what I would do, I would just come home every weekend. I would come almost every weekend. I'd come home just to be with the family. And it took me about a year of doing that before I could get officially moved back to New Orleans in 2003.
Year 2000?
2003.
2003. Wow, so then you're finally back in 2003. You get 2 years to enjoy the city as it was, and then comes the hurricane, and then the levees fail. And tell us where were you when it happened, and how did you and your family deal with it initially?
Oh man, I can tell you it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. And I, for a short time after college, I lived in Dallas for a short time. And I remember leaving Dallas and going up to Chicago, and sometimes I was like, wow, I miss this place, and so I thought when I eventually left Chicago to come back to New Orleans, which is where I always wanted to be, I thought, man, I know there are going to be some times I'm going to regret it. There's going to be some time that I'm going to wish I was back in Chicago or something like that. But, that never happened, man. I got back to New Orleans, and it was kind of like the place for me. I love Chicago. It's a fantastic city, but I never regretted moving back, And then, and I think the difference for me, I've considered it quite a bit. The difference is that while living in New Orleans for me, I really feel alive from the time I wake up in the morning until the time I get in bed at night. And, I wake up and, I got like a little informal group that I drink coffee with, and we sit around, and sometimes we bullshit, or other times we talking about really serious stuff, and, and so I leave there and I got other things to do. It's just one thing after another. My day is just full of a lot of stuff. And and when I can contrast it to my time in Chicago, Chicago is an amazing city, but still, there was a lot of times when I lived for like the weekend. It was like, wow, I'll be glad when Thursday get here because, that's when everything's going to come alive for me. You know what I mean? And so when I got to New Orleans, that's how I felt. I was loving it, you see? And so, and then, and in the meantime, this new thing, all these, all this music in New Orleans, I'm getting to meet these guys, and it's getting to the point where they're knowing who I am, and they seem to like my poetry as well. And so I got, like, somebody like a guy like Herlin Riley, right, who, he was Whit Marcellus's drummer for like 17 years, guy like Herlin, or Dave Torkanowski, Detroit Brooks, whomever. They see me walking a joint, be Shannon Powell, hey, we got Mr. Chuck Perkins just walking out. Hey, Chuck, come up here and do his poem, because I think that they could see the musicality in my poetry as well. And it wasn't, they knew they weren't just calling a guy up who was just going to read a poem while they play music. They was going to call somebody, and this poem was going to be performed. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it was going to groove with the music almost, right? And so by the time the hurricane came, it's like, first my family and I, we were saying, all right, well, we'll stay. We're going to get a hotel. And, because the last time we had a really, really damaging hurricane, it was like Hurricane Betsy or something like that. And I think I was born, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a couple weeks before Betsy. Right?
Oh,
and
really?
so,
okay.
Yep. And so, you got almost like 40 years of nothing happening. And so, folks come and say, they got this big bad hurricane coming, and nobody's really taking it serious. And so at first we're like, okay, let's just get a hotel, and we're going to have to go through this whole song and dance, and then we'll come back home. But then when we watched the news, there was something different, I mean, first of all, when you consider the size of that storm, there was one shot where it seemed like it covered the entire Gulf. And then, the thing that really scared us is it was still not too very far from Florida, and they said that those winds had got up to almost 175 miles an hour. And I was like, oh, my goodness. Of course, at the time, I got two kids. One of them's a year old. The other's like 6 years old. I'm like, man, I can't risk my kids. And so we get in the car, and it took us about 10 hours to get to Jackson, Mississippi. And that drive might normally take like 3 hours. So it took us 10 hours to get there. Say like Jackson is about 180 miles from New Orleans. Wow. So it took us 10 hours to get 180 miles. And so now we get there. It's my brother's in-laws. They have a big condo, but it wasn't big enough for the 26 of us that ended up, hunkering down in the place. And so we get there, and we turn on CNN, and now we got, just wait and see what happens. And so we, all of us are glued to the television, and it seems like we're going to luck out a little bit. It seems like the storm is starting to veer a little east and headed to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And it's unfortunate. I mean, it did, and those are people, if you lived, along the Gulf Coast in Mississippi, your home was turned into splinters, Mm-hmm. And so we still had like Category 3 winds here, but the storm passed, and I could still remember this former local news guy, Garland Robinette, saying, hey, listen, the storm's over. I want everybody to know the city of New Orleans is still here. Maybe we lost a few oak trees, but not nearly as bad as anyone ever imagined. And all of us are like, yes, all right, we'll be able to go home. But then, we didn't realize that the worst had yet to come. And so when, maybe almost a day after the storm was over, the levees and the flood walls started to fail. And once that happened, the city started filling with water. And we had always been told that New Orleans was a bowl and that it was below sea level. And now we're seeing, like, okay, this bowl that we live in is filling with water. And I can remember one of the prognosticators said that the experts That's it. And this was probably when I was at my lowest point when I heard this. The expert said that it was going to take, I think he said, 6 months just to drain the city. And I was like, you have to be kidding me. 6 months to, if that's going to be the case, then I guess the city of New Orleans is dead, right? It's over. And I thought of all of the people. I thought of my friends. I thought of the community. I thought of the people I have coffee with, who we shared time with, and stories, and details about our families and our kids. And I was like, it's done. It's over. And my family and I, we ended up coming back to get our first look maybe 3 weeks after the storm.
Oh wow!
And I can remember, the main thing I remember when I first went to my home, that it was like that last scene in Planet of the Apes. In the last scene
when he's on the
of the
beach.
Planet.
When Charlton Heston's on the beach.
When Charlton Heston, he's walking to Manhattan, and then there's silence and no birds and no trees. It's nothing. It's just him. And when I walked to my house, that's what it would seem like. There was this big nasty ring around the entire city, and so you could, you didn't have to ask anyone how high does water go. All you had to do was look at that ring. It looked like the city was just one big dirty bathtub. And when they pull a stopper, and when you pull the stopper on the bathtub, it leaves that ring in the tub. Well, they had that ring was around the whole city. And I remember the first thing looking at my home, and I couldn't tell where the sidewalk was because sediment and grit and mud and all kinds of other debris was just. There was a layer of it over everything, so you couldn't even tell what the sidewalk was. And now I did have some good news, because I was told that in my neighborhood, I lived in Gentilly, and I was told in my neighborhood there was water to the roof. And it's amazing, that when I was told that, and I conceded that it probably lost everything. And I went to sleep and I woke up every day just wishing for certain photographs. I hope that this picture is high enough on the wall, and I hope that these books are high enough someplace that I have them. You understand? It's like,
absolutely.
Even though a lot of my other stuff, I accepted the fact that it was gone, but I knew I could get another stove, another sofa, another bed, all of that stuff. But I was thinking about books and like family mementos, But luckily for me, that when I went to my house, I ended up only having about a couple inches of water in my house, because I live like 2 blocks from this ridge, they call it the Gentilly Ridge, and so my house sits on piers, and it's a little hill that it sits on too, because all of that property over there is kind of high, and so I was fortunate. Now I got a twin brother who had just bought his home. And he was like 4 blocks from me. So he was 4 blocks from me, and he had about 4.5 feet of water in his house.
Wow! It's almost chest high.
Yep.
And then one of the things that made the aftermath, one of the many things that made the aftermath so difficult, was the things that were being said about New Orleans after this devastation. And you heard certain people say, "Oh, just bulldoze it." And
yeah, and that was heartbreaking too. It was very heartbreaking. I mean, to hear. I mean, it's a place. I mean, I moved away after college. I knew I was going to always come back, and I got back in 2003. But I'd spent my whole time there, and it was a lovely place, and it was vibrant, and it was all of this. And because New Orleans is a part of the Creolized world, because there's so many different groups who ended up there from all over the world, you find all of these different cultural expressions here, and it's beautiful. And to hear people talk about it the way they talked about it, like it was just some poor-ass people who, and maybe they were worth saving, maybe, but that shit wasn't worth saving, and in their city, who cares, just send them someplace else. And so a lot of my poetry that was written in the aftermath was really written in response to that. It was really me telling people why this place was important and why we love it and why it was so beautiful, despite its many flaws, I might add.
Well, you have a piece, in fact, we're going to play right now called We Ain't Dead Yet. And I think in that you express some of that, just, I guess, for lack of a better word for now, aggravation with the attitude some people had about the city and its future and its culture, where they were just willing to just discard it. So we're going to listen to that. Yeah.
Well, there's a line in that poem that really comes from a headline in the New York Times. And the headline was "The Death of an American City." Mm-hmm. And I can remember by that time I had gotten back home. Let's say maybe it was about 3 months after the storm. And there was a guy, the barista in the coffee place, when I was drinking coffee, he saw me read it, and he said, "Hey, man, come on now. We're not dead yet. We ain't dead yet." And so that's where that title comes from, We Ain't Dead Yet.
Nice, nice. All right, well, we're going to listen to that right now. Chuck Perkins, poetry and performance, and the Melody Makers, We Ain't Dead Yet.
Queen City of the South, but she ain't no Southern belle. She's a bourbon-drinking broad made hard by her battles and wars, diseases, and other floods. But at night, her streetlights are the twinkle in her eyes, and from the high-rise on those nights when the clouds have deserted the rainmaker, you can find life in them sockets that sparkle like the Big Dipper. But when the levees broke, our hope got soaked, and so did the twinkle in her eyes, and it was wondered if this might lead to our demise. Because from the high-rise, you can see what is left when light is sucked back into the belly of its creator. The remaining darkness wrapped his arms around the mangled body of the city, hiding her gaping wounds from a nervous moon, who wondered what happened to the music and wanted to know how come lately the rain smelled like tears. The sad smell of fearful children and waterlogged dreams made the moon blue. The rancid smell of neglect and raw sewage made the moon reflect badly on the water in the United States government. So badly, the blue moonshine drinker got full, started pulling at the water and kicking up a storm. Articles in the New York Times titled Death of an American City had people from uptown to the Lower Ninth Ward pinching themselves and blowing in mirrors, looking for confirmation of life while trying not to lose hope, like Mr. Joe, who was a consummate optimist, because he had hope all of his life, and when he was first given the news about his flooded home, he woke up every morning to a cup of coffee and the hope that things were not as bad as they said. And this time he embraced hope firmly in his hands because he was a carpenter. But he turned his head long enough to wipe his eyes and blow his nose, only to turn back and find that his hope had flatlined in his hands. A double Katrina whammy, too much pressure on a 70-year-old heart. So days later, he went the way of his hope, and his friends wondered what hurt most. Was it the destruction of his home or the death of his hope? Talking heads serving up 24-hour news slop referred to us as refugees. Just before, a U.S. congressman suggested that the old girl be bulldozed, forcing us to collectively fish our birth certificates from the toxic soup to find that space, that talk about place of origin, to see if we really did live in a city that really wasn't a state, that really was in the United States of America, looking for confirmation of citizenship. The replay was called a requiem in 4 acts, so we found our reflections amok and whispered in its ear. Can you tell us if we're still alive, please? Unable to come up with the right words, our reflections didn't answer back. And we were unnerved by the silence because the eulogizers were beginning to eulogize. But then, we saw your tambourine shake. And we heard your drum beat. And we felt the hot air screaming from the fat end of the brass. We knew that it was the breath of the city. And it was the confirmation that we were looking for. So we shouted out to the grave digger, hold on to your dirt, partner, because we ain't dead yet.
All right, we're back, and very powerful piece. I have so many favorites, but it's one of my favorites of yours. And I want to remind everybody, one of the reasons we're doing this particular call, it's a little bit of a rent party. We want to raise awareness and encourage people that want to do something to help out Haiti right now to go ahead and do it. And Chuck and I have been talking about different things we could offer, and here's a great thing. If you can contribute $100 or more, Chuck will get you a CD of I know your music. I don't know the title of the album. Love Note from Nola.
A love song for Nola.
A love song from Nola.
That's right.
It's the two songs that you've heard here, plus a whole bunch more. Trust me, if you like these two, you're going to love the rest of the album. He'll sign it. We'll get it to you, and that would be for a contribution of $100 or more. If you have never been in New Orleans, or if you've been in New Orleans 100 times and want to experience it on a really pretty profound level, for $500, if you make a $500 contribution to Haiti Rebuilding, Chuck will take you and a total of 4 people, you and 3 people, 4 total, around the city for an evening. So you'll be going out with Chuck, and I can tell you from experience, there's nothing like experiencing New Orleans with Chuck Perkins. It's an experience money can't buy. You'll go right to the head of the class in terms of at least getting a feeling for all the riches that New Orleans has. Because sometimes if you go there as a tourist for the first time and you don't know anybody and you don't know what's going on, you really will miss a lot. And with Chuck, you won't miss much. You really will see a lot of stuff. So the way this will work is you figure out which group you want to donate to. Mail us the electronic receipt, just so we can see that you did it. Mail it to ken@jazzonthetube.com. That's ken@jazzonthetube.com. And of course with your mailing address. And if you donated $100 or more, I'll make sure you get the CD signed by Chuck himself. Very valuable, by the way, as you can tell. And if you're going to New Orleans, a $500 orientation with Chuck Perkins and 3 of your friends and you, I mean, that is just money really well spent. Trust me, you will have such a better understanding of where you are, and it would be a great launch pad for anybody visiting the city the first time. And you know what, for anybody that's been there a lot, it's a deep city. I've spent probably a year worth of winters there, 3 months at a time for about 4 years running, and I never even got close to the bottom of it. You just keep finding layer after layer of new understanding. In terms of who to donate to, that's up to you. I do like the lambifund.org, LAMBIFUND.org, because they live in Haiti. They're not just dropping in, doing some stuff and leaving. That's their whole commitment to be in Haiti, and they're specifically working with the rural populations. And you have to think, we're a big country, a rich country, and as devastating as it is when people lose stuff here, if you're out in the countryside and you lose your fall crop, and and there's no social net of any kind there, you were on your own. So this project, this ever-going project they have of rural development, empowering the people there, they certainly provide relief supplies, but their focus is long-term rebuilding the countryside, reforestation, building mills, so instead of having to sell their crops cheap, they can do their own milling, helping them with new crops, helping them with agricultural techniques. It's a really good group. But you may want to give to another group, one that you can always trust is Doctors Without Borders. They go all over the world and provide emergency care, and there's going to be a lot of that needed. Oxfam is really good. I'm going to say something that some people might not understand, but believe me, if you're from New York or New Orleans, you will understand. Do not give to the American Red Cross. I'm not going to go into a long reason about that, but I will say that I saw a news item in the Washington Post just today, where the people of Haiti specifically requested that people not give money to the American Red Cross if you want to help Haiti. It's too long a story to go into why, but just take it on faith now, do your own research. That's not a group that we recommend. But anyway, just, send me the receipt at ken@jazzonthetube.com and send your address so we can send you the CD. And if you're going to do an evening with Chuck, send the address too and phone number and all that so we can send you a letter so that you can be in touch with him. So let's talk about the aftermath. One of the stories you told me once, which was so fascinating, is how important the bars were in the rebuilding, the very, very early reorganization of New Orleans society, because they were some of the institutions that opened up quickest, and they became meeting places and communication posts. And can you tell a little bit about that experience?
Oh, yeah, man. I still remember, just once, after we'd been back to New Orleans for about a week, we had been, I think I was in Jackson, Mississippi altogether for about six weeks, and I was one of the fortunate ones. My in-laws had a place that was on another one of those ridges, and their home was high and dry, and so we were actually able to move there. And it took me a year of work in my house before I can get back there, but we were at least able to go stay with my in-laws and work on my home. And I remember after being back for about a week, I just wanted to find like some sense of normalcy, like to try and find people who, just for a moment, if we could just have a beer and talk and laugh with each other like we were human beings, I wanted that. And I remember when I left my mother-in-law's house, it's bizarre because we had electricity in the house, but all of the street lights were out, so, you get in your car and you drive through complete darkness. Mm-hmm. And while we were riding through complete darkness, at the time, people were just told to take all of the stuff out of your house and put it on the sidewalk. And so you drive down the street, and, it's like just miles of garbage and trash, stacked up 10 feet high. You know what I mean? Sometimes places even higher than that, all, and you can see almost like the shadows of this stuff. And again, it's heartbreaking, and the streets are basically deserted. The houses are basically deserted, especially when you drive a few blocks, you're no longer on the ridge, and you're in a place where people can't even come back, right? And so you drive through all of this silence and darkness, and, it's like, oh, my God. It's like, man, you know what? That might be over for this place, you see. And then, I can remember, where my in-laws lived and maybe where the Maroney was. It might have been like about maybe a 12-minute ride. But, you get 10 minutes away, and you can look up ahead, and at some point you can see, like, civilization, there. You can tell that there are lights on there and that there are people living there. And, so it makes you feel a little better. And the first place I went, so I'll never forget this, was Cafe Brazil, and it was on Frenchman Street. And I walk in, and there's a nice crowd in there, a healthy crowd. And John Boutte is on there. He's singing The City of New Orleans, that song about the 1927 flood and other songs. And, people are laughing and crying and happy to be living. And when I saw that, I think that was the thing that said, you know what, maybe there is hope. Maybe there's hope. Another similar story is that maybe after a couple months, it's maybe 2-3 months in New Orleans, trumpet legend Mr. Kermit Ruffin, he's still playing at his little juke joint down in the 9th Ward called Vaughn's, right? And Vaughn's is open because, they got this thing called the sliver by the river. The closer you are to the river, then the higher up you are, because after thousands of years of flooding, when the river floods and leaves a sediment, the highest sediment is closer to the river. And so this particular neighborhood was pretty much intact. And I was going there, and at that time, sometimes you would really get the feeling that you were in a third world country, because in the neighborhoods that had lights, sometimes it just go off, like the whole, you just lose power.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to go to Vaughn's, and I was in the Marigny, and Vaughn's is in the Bywater, and then the lights were out. And I was like, oh, man, I really wanted to go hit Kermit tonight, but we don't have any power. I guess I'd go home. And I reminded myself of something. I said, this is New Orleans. So, I like other places I've lived, like Dallas and Chicago, or any, man, the power go out. It's like, okay, everybody go home, try us again tomorrow. But I said, this is New Orleans. There's a chance that all isn't lost, And so I said, I'm going to just go check it out and see if anything's happening at Vaughn's. And I was right, man. Oh, I get there, and the club is rocking, no power. Kermit, they got one light over the bandstand, and Kermit took a drop light, and he has it plugged into his truck. And so there's one drop light over the bandstand, and everybody's in there having the time of their life, man. And then, at about, say, 2:30 in the morning, the lights come on. And when the lights came on, everybody, threw their hands up and screamed, yeah! And then, about 30 minutes later, the lights went off again. And everybody threw their hands up and was like, yeah! And I was like, wow. Yeah, it was awesome, man. It was awesome. Ken, there is one thing I want to say, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, and that is, and I've said this before, but the reason I always say it is because I mean it, man. Like the aftermath of, there were a lot of people in distress and hurt during the aftermath of Katrina. There were some things, I'm going to say, even in terms of, for working class, poor black people who lived in maybe the lower ninth ward didn't get the same, consideration that some more affluent white people got who live in Lakeview. Now the flood itself was equal opportunity, and everybody got touched. But in terms of, who got to rebuild their lives better and faster, it seems like for poor people, it was more of a process. Now, with that being said, that aside, my faith in humanity was really, I'm going to say emboldened by the aftermath of Katrina, because, man, sometimes we get this notion that we live in this dog-eat-dog world where it's just every man for himself. And, if you fall and you can't get up, then tough, you better try to figure something out because there'll be nobody there to help you, But after Katrina, the thing that I will go to my grave remembering, man, is that there were people from all over this country and from many other places in the world, right? Despite this country's vast resources and vast wealth, there were people coming from all over to help us dig our way out of the mud. And, sometimes even with that, you get the notion that while the cameras are really bright and everybody's interested in it, and then people want to come and get some of that and be a part of that. But, the cameras were probably gone maybe a year into the thing, I mean, that's a pretty lengthy time. But they had volunteers coming to this city well over 6-7 years, man. 6 or 7 years. Yeah. And it just reconfirmed for me, man, that despite, what we see when we're inundated with all of this negativity on the news, that there really are a lot of beautiful people out there, man, who really do care, who really care.
Yeah, that anybody that didn't get to see that, it's true. They just kept coming from all over and doing all kinds of things. Some people were helping rebuild, some people were teaching, some people were just doing all different kinds of things to help out, which gives me a good chance to remind everybody the purpose of this call is to highlight and put in people's awareness of the devastation in Haiti from Hurricane Matthew. And, fortunately, it's not easy for a lot of us to get on a plane and go down there to help. And also a lot of people that need help are way in the countryside.
And I want to say this much right here, I talked very briefly about some of the racial implications, right, and how it's perceived and how people deal with that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there was a slave insurrection in Haiti that happened sometime around like 1802, 1803. And I think because it was a slave insurrection, that people, I think a lot of people in the West were like resentful for that,
Oh yeah. But if you were a part of that system and were profiting from it, yeah, you didn't like it one bit.
But get this, I say that if you love the United States of America, then you should be grateful for that slave insurrection, because you see, before that insurrection led by Toussaint Louverture, Napoleon had big plans for the New World, but it all hinged on Haiti, right? Right. And so once the French lost that island, that profitable island that was like a cash cow because of all the sugar cane and all that stuff down there, right? It was a cash cow. Once they lost that, they were like, you know what, forget it. Get rid of the Louisiana Purchase. So they end up selling the Louisiana Purchase for $15 million, right? And so because of that slave insurrection allowed the United States of America to double in size, and to ultimately make this whole manifest destiny thing a reality, where the United States would stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. If it wasn't for that thing that happened in Haiti, the United States of America, and in that case, the entire world as we know it would be vastly different by now, right?
Absolutely. And my understanding is that's the only time in all of human history where a group of enslaved people fought, and there's always been rebellions, but it's hard. What do? You don't have the guns, you don't have the logistics, There's always been a lot of rebellions, but that was the first and only time in all of human history where an enslaved people fought back and took the country back. So it was a major thing, and you're right, Chuck, there was a lot of dirty dealing against Haiti after that because, the world was, the Western Hemisphere.
Well, to give you an example of that, right? So, because the story certainly doesn't stop there. Like I gave you an example of how the Louisiana Purchase, and that's a piece of American real estate that stretched from New Orleans down at the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to Canada.
Yeah.
They sold it for $15 million. And so what does Haiti get? What's their reward for freeing themselves? The French put $150 million indemnity on them. And so when we look at Haiti, and we see in some ways it seems to have been economically crippled for as long as we can all remember. But imagine an island nation that size with $150 million indemnity on it. And that translates to about $22 billion. Now, the other thing, I was reading something just recently, because a lot of times if we aren't really that privy to world affairs, if we aren't paying attention, we just look up and see some end results and we're like, wow, man, these people can't get it together. But I was reading where President Clinton forced, like the Haitians had a really substantial rice industry there, right? And, they eat a lot of rice. And so President Clinton forced them to drop their tariffs on American imported subsidized rice.
Right.
He forced them to drop the tariffs, and then it decimated their rice industry.
Yep.
Right? I mean, that industry had provided jobs, they were able to feed themselves, all kinds of stuff. But Clinton forced subsidized rice on them with no taxes or anything like that, and now they are paying the consequences of that, right? And so I guess the only point I'm trying to make is sometimes we look and see and we think to ourselves, well, maybe they should be doing more, they should be more productive, or maybe if people are lazy or they're just corrupt or politically they just can't get it together. But some of the ill effects of what we are seeing with Ireland comes are directly, I guess, offshoots from like Western interference, especially coming from this country.
Absolutely. And I think people are more aware of that dynamic after what we've gone through in the United States in 2008, where the banks, just the big banks just ran wild, and they're still running wild.
That's
and they're
right.
doing it.
That's
they're
right.
doing real economic harm to small businesses, working people. So now, maybe 10 years ago, maybe before that, it might have been hard for an American to say, "Oh, come on, the bankers." And how could that be? How can because it was basically a money thing. You
That's right.
us out, so we're going to put this big debt on you. And it might have been hard for Americans to imagine that and say, well, how bad could it be? Well, we're getting a small taste of what happens when big finance, behaves in a rapacious way. And you have to imagine Haiti, they 1,000 times, like they didn't, like in boxing, no gloves. They took the gloves off, and it's been nonstop. And I'm glad you brought up the Clinton thing too. There's not a political call, and if you love the Clintons, I don't mean to say anything bad about them, but they raised a lot of money supposedly to help Haiti after the earthquake. And if anybody wants to dig into that on their own, I won't give you my opinion. I'll just say look it up. A lot of that money didn't go where it was supposed to. So this taking advantage, basically kicking somebody when they're down. This has been going on against Haiti by very powerful countries. I'm sorry to say the United States, France has also been involved in that. This has been going on for a long time. So, Chuck, I'm so glad you brought that point up. We're all very lucky, those of us that are on this call and can be on the phone and inside a house and high and dry and well-fed. We're very lucky. We could have easily been born in the back country of Haiti, and it might have been we would have had a very different life experience. So I think we should always remember that. So one of the reasons we're doing this call, besides to share Chuck's recollections of post-Katrina New Orleans, and then we're going to get into his current activities, is just to shine a light on this and say, if you have an instinct to help Haiti, please go ahead and do it. The group I like, lambi.org, lambi.org, and is that right? Lambi Fund, I'm sorry, LAMBI Fund.org. I like them because they're in Haiti all the time. That's what they do. They don't do anything else. They focus on the rural communities, the country people who are they're victims of this situation, this system. And they're, anybody that's traveled in the third world knows that people in the third world work like hell. They work 100 times harder than any of us ever do, but they've got the deck stacked against them. So Lambi works with them to build mills, so instead of selling their grain that they grow really cheap to the middleman, they can mill it themselves and sell it locally and keep the money in the community. They help with reforestation. That's a huge problem. Why are the trees gone? Because the trees were cut down to pay the bills. And that, by the way, that happens in the United States, too. I remember the beautiful redwood forests in Northern California. This Wall Street guy bought a bunch of debt that somebody else had, and in order to pay that debt off, they had to cut down, square miles of redwood trees, gone forever. So it happens everywhere. So you may have other groups that you like to give to. Doctors Without Borders is great. Catholic Relief Services is good, too. They're tried and true. Oxfam is great. I'm going to say this. I won't get into the details, but American Red Cross, save your money. Give it to some other group. And if you inspired to give $100 or more, just send me your receipt with your address, and we'll send you a signed copy of the CD that we're listening to tonight. And if you're inspired to give $500 or more, and you're planning to go to New Orleans, Chuck will take you and 3 friends around, so a total of four people plus Chuck around New Orleans, and I absolutely guarantee you'll come back a changed person. You'll really know New Orleans. So that's that. And just send me the receipt at ken@jazzontheTube.com, and I'll make sure you get the signed CD, and I'll make sure that you get a certificate or a letter or something that documents, so that when you show up in New Orleans, obviously give Chuck some notice and coordinate with him. So let's fast forward to the future, or to the present, actually. It's been, 2005. It's been, oh my goodness, 11 years.
Yep.
You've had 2 albums come out. You toured Europe. You were at the Manchester Poetry Festival, which is the big poetry festival in all of Europe. You performed at South Bank on the same bill with Amiri Baraka. So
Yep.
your poetry's taken you a long way. You made some really interesting TV spots for the Hornets.
Yeah, for the Hornets. Did some stuff in Paris as well, and
oh yeah, man.
New York City. I've been, I tell you, it's amazing, man. Because it's like I got home, I started doing the stuff with the music, put it out there, and boy, it kind of caught, like, in a way, it seems like everything was happening so fast, I mean, 6 months after putting the band together, I was going to Paris, and I've had people like make documentaries, and then the thing got picked up by a German record label, and I'm doing commercials for the Hornets and that kind of stuff. And but one of the things that kind of like put the skids on everything, unfortunately, I wanted to open a performance hall, my own club, because prior to me opening this club called Cafe Istanbul, I worked in sales. And like a lot of other people, I found myself unemployed in about 2009. I got to reinvent myself, figure out what I'm going to do. I didn't want to go back and get like a regular kind of corporate job. I wanted to work close to the kind of stuff I loved, and I got that. But it's a little more than I bargained for because I didn't realize at the time, I thought that since I'm going to own a performance space with a stage and a back line and all of everything you need is a real music club, right? That it would just increase my performances. But my workload, we've been open now about 6 years, and I'm working really harder than I've ever worked in my life. But I'm enjoying every day. And the only drawback is that I don't perform, and I'm not writing as much anymore. And sometimes I think about it, like when I was riding that little wave, and I was doing so many fun things, going so many wonderful, interesting places, and a part of so many great projects. I mean, if I'm not doing this stuff anymore, then it's like, the phone slowly stop ringing.
Oh yeah, it's true for all of us. Yeah, it's true for all of us.
Right, but it's cool. I mean, I'm having a great time at the club. And, I was telling someone the other day, the thing about, like, writing poetry and being any kind of artist, or most kinds of artists, right? I could still, you could get better at what you do every day until you die. So it's not like, I'm doing this club thing, but I'm like an athlete, and then by the time I'm done with the club, I'll be too old to do what I do, I mean, I still have my eyes open. I'm still paying attention. I still have things to say. I still have something to write about. And in addition to the club, in addition to that, we open almost every day. We do everything. You can come there and see bands, foreign movies. You can see a classical anything from classical music to a rap battle or a drag show or a circus, aerialists. We do all of this stuff. And also, during the day, I'm a radio talk show host, Monday through Friday, 2 hours a day from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. I got a show. It's called The Conscious Hour with Chuck Perkins. And if you're listening, you're on the Chuck wagon, baby.
So you're on every day of the week now?
Monday through Friday, man.
That's I remember when I saw you last, it was just a new thing. I think you just had one show a week.
Yeah, well, when I first started, it was just, one of my friends, Jean Nathan, she started, and she's a good friend of mine, and if she was going to be out of town, she called, hey, Chuck, I'm going to be out of town. Can you take over? Can you do my show on Thursday? And I say, sure, of course. And so I did that maybe about 5 or 6 times, and then they say, hey, man, what about your own show? And I say, great. And so I was doing 1 day a week for 2 hours, and then I went from 1 day a week for 2 hours to 4 days a week for 1 hour. And then in March, I started doing 5 days a week for 2 hours a day. And today, the general manager of the station told me she got a chance to look at some Nielsen numbers, and my show it's an AM station, so it's not like it's like big, huge blockbuster numbers. But she said, and my show is the fastest growing show on our station.
Okay, I'm not surprised, but that's great. That's great. Tell everybody the call letters again.
Yeah, it's WBOK, 12:30 a.m. And I guess if you live in New Orleans, you can just listen to 12:30 a.m. radio, or you can just listen online, WBOK1230am.com. And it's every day, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And you can call in as well. And so and I like to encourage. Of course, we all want to know that that we're not some lunatic, and they're people who appreciate what we're saying. But for me, I like being challenged on stuff. I like somebody who has a well thought out like opposition. Like if I get the impression that somebody's just a nutcase and they just saying stuff, but they really can't support anything they're saying, I don't like calls like that. But if it's somebody who has a well thought out, like opposition, like they could explain why they feel the way they feel, and they make sense, it's like I enjoy that. Because I think when you have a discourse and dialogue with somebody like that, there's so much potential to learn stuff.
Yeah, like an honest argument, where people are seeking the truth by sharing their own viewpoint.
That's right.
They're not a zealot. They're not just coming off some crazy direction just for the sake of being crazy. They have an opinion. They want you to know it. They want to explain it. But then if they listen to yours and will accept the parts that are true, well, that will change them. It will change you. Yes, it's a good thing. It's a good thing for everybody.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah.
So just one more time, the call letters and the numbers for anybody that wants to tune in on the internet.
The radio station is WBOK 1230 AM, but if online, just WBOK1230am.com. And again, it's from 9 a.m. Central, 9 a.m. Central time to 11 a.m. And it's mostly it's a political format, but I have a tremendous amount of latitude. I get to talk about, whatever it is I want to talk about, whatever I find interesting. And, I do take that as a great deal of responsibility because, I think it's incumbent on me to make sure that I have something, interesting to talk about, and that I can talk about it in a way that's responsible, and that I do my homework, and that if I'm going to say something, that I could support it.
Great. Wow, I love that. I knew that you had that 1 hour, but I love that you're expanding. Hey, Cafe Istanbul, for people who don't know it, could you tell them the address and the neighborhood that it's in?
Cafe Istanbul it's right on the edge of the Marigny, and the address is 2372 St. Claude Avenue. And the thing I tell people is, you got to check the website, and the website is cafeistanbulnola.com, because we have this thing where we have different shows all the time. And so, we don't have a kind of brand where we have, like if you go to Snug Harbor in New Orleans, there's a certain kind of jazz music that you will hear when you go there. You don't necessarily have to, you can check the website if you want, but even if you just take a shot in the dark, it's going to be somewhere in a particular ball field. In my place, it has its pros and its cons, but in my place, you can go from one end of the spectrum to the other. And so you might go and, you might end up in your version of heaven, or, you could be like, what in the hell is going on in here? and that makes for an interesting place for me.
It's eclectic.
That's right.
It's eclectic. Everybody should check it out, because you'll see things there, and definitely, check the schedule, make sure it's a show that you're interested in. But you'll see things there that go beyond the stereotyped version of New Orleans. Certain clubs, you know what you're going to get. It's always going to be in a certain zone every night, and that's great. But New Orleans is much bigger than just, one kind of music. There's a lot of artists doing a lot of different things. There's a lot of community stuff that takes place at Chuck's Club, so it's also a way to get a feeling for the real New Orleans community, behind the tourist curtain. Because it's a city like every place else, with families and kids and people going to school, people going to work, trying to get ahead, and wonderful people, and a great way to connect with the real part of the city too, not just the entertainment, the strictly entertainment part of it. We're doing this call tonight as a awareness raiser and to encourage everybody. It's been a terrible catastrophe in Haiti, a country that, as we got into earlier in the call, has suffered a lot, and not due to its own failings often, but very due to just having the deck really badly stacked against it. And it's a good time to help out. I like Lambi, Lambi. It's lambifund.org. I like them because they live there. They're always in Haiti. That's their sole focus, is helping people in the countryside basically build stronger economic bases for themselves. It's a great group. The money they spend is really well spent. You may have a group that you already know. You may like Oxfam. You may like Doctors Without Borders. Some of these groups that have such great reputations. And roll up their sleeves and really get places and do what needs to be done. If you're inspired to give one of these groups $100 or more, send me the receipt with your address on it so we can send you a signed copy of Chuck's CD, Love Song from NOLA. Great. You've already heard two pieces. We're going to go out with one more, which is my favorite. I think this is a masterpiece. I think this is one of the great pieces of New Orleans musical art. I think it belongs in the canon of great New Orleans pieces. You'll see why when you hear it. You're going to hear that song. You're going to hear a bunch of others, and it's going to be signed by Chuck. If you are ever planning to go to New Orleans and you want, with a bunch of friends, and you want to get into it deep, not just be a tourist sort of skirting the edges, but really get into it and see how it's put together, at least get a glimpse into how it's put together. Chuck is the best person to go around with. I can tell you that from experience. And for a $500 contribution or more, you get an evening with Chuck, you and 3 friends, total of 4 people. You got to coordinate with him, obviously, make sure it works for everybody time-wise. And he'll take you around, and he'll take you places, and you'll run. The funny thing about Chuck is if you're walking down the street with him, you'll run into half a dozen named, known people in New Orleans. This often happens. Can't predict it, but it happens a lot. John Boutte, you might run into Kermit Ruffin. You never know who he's going to run into, and Chuck knows all these folks, and you'll get to say hi to them and meet them and get a feeling for the scene. So if you're inspired to do that, that would be great. And just send me the receipt with your address on it so we can get you the CD, ken@jazzonthetube.com. Hey, we're going to go out with this piece that I referred to a second ago called Little Liza Jane. And that's the first piece of Chuck's work I ever heard. And it just knocked me out. Still knocks me out. It gives me goosebumps when I hear it. It's about the spirit that rebuilt New Orleans. And we've had an interview a while back, a couple of years ago. I forget what it was called, The Atlantis or The New Atlantis. It was by John Swenson. And he wrote a whole book, which I'll put a link on the page for everybody. He wrote a whole book about the fact that it really was, to a large degree, the musicians who came back. And what's that line that you say? They came back broke and uninsured and...
But they still came back.
But they still came back, And, Chuck's given some idea of the desolation of the place. There were no birds singing. There were no lights. There was nobody on the streets. There were no stores open. The street lights didn't work. Piles of trash at 10 feet or 20 feet. I mean, it could go as high as you could see in some neighborhoods. I mean, it was just unreal. And how do you come back from that? And one of the ways you come back from anything is art and music. And a lot of musicians came back. Was it unappreciated, uninsured? I forget. It's such a great line. You'll hear it in the song. And what I love, and you'll hear it, is he names these guys by name. Somehow he manages to fit, I don't know, he named like 30, 40 musicians. I don't know if you ever counted, but their names are in the song. And it's done to the classic New Orleans tune, Little Liza Jane. So we're going to go out on that. But Chuck, I want to thank you so much for taking the time for this call. I want to encourage everybody, check out Chuck's show. I bet it's really good. I have it on my iPhone. I can just dial in and hear it when it's on. If you're in New Orleans, definitely see what's going on at Cafe Istanbul. If it's something that strikes your fancy, definitely make the trip. It's a New Orleans institution. And Chuck is performing anywhere. If you're so lucky, do not miss that. And that's pretty much what I have to say. The website is cafeistanbulnola.com. So Chuck, thank you so much for this time. I've learned so much about New Orleans from you and your poetry and the music that you've put with it. I think really is one of the best ways for someone to enter into the whole spirit of New Orleans from the early days, through the storm, after the storm, rebuilding from the storm, and then all the other things that go on in the city.
Oh, well, thank you, man. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show. I do, want to remind people that, it is about Haiti, and when we, talk about maybe, some of the obstacles we had, some of the impediments we had in the city of New Orleans, a city that exists in the United States of America with all of its vast resources, but, it was daunting, but we still managed, right? And then you consider a poor country, island nation like Haiti. If it was tough for us, it must be, like 100 times tougher for them trying to recover from the hurricane on top of the devastation that was brought on by the earthquake. So if there's anything anybody can do to help the people of Haiti, I would really encourage them to do so.
Great. Thank you, Chuck. Okay. Fasten your seatbelts and get ready for a nice trip through New Orleans with Chuck Perkins' Little Eliza Jane.
They better treat you right. Little Liza J. They flag got to come, but you got tonight. Little Liza J. In the morning, oh, Little Liza, Little Liza J. 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 This is for my artists of virtuosity who kept the music in the mystery. It's for my artistic vanguard who came back when times were hard, who sometimes came back to nothing but still came back underrated and uninsured, putting their horns where their mouth is. This is for my buck-jumping Pied Pipers who gon' second line my people all the way back home. This poem's for you. This is for my melody makers, for my cowbell ringers and my tambourine shakers. It's for the lady buck jumpers, for the rebirth brass band and the Storyville stumpers, for the soul rebels and the hotties, for the little rappers wanting to dime when all they got is to eat. It's for Kermit Ruffin and the barbecue swingers, for Marva Wright and all my blues singers, for making that music that heal our pain. It's for Shannon Powell and Lil Liza Jane. I got Liza, you got Liza, you got Liza. I'm from the Noy and I thought I told you. It's for the Golden Comanches and the Wild Magnolia. For loving our city, we ain't giving up an inch. It's for Stanton Moore, Bob, and George French. We love her scat and we love her razzle-dazzle. It's for Irvin Mayfield and Jermaine Basil. It's for Dr. Michael White for keeping it tight. And for Uncle Lionel, still raising hell. We sure gonna miss him when we die. It's for Troy Sawyer and Kevin O'Day, Kid Chocolate Brown and John Boutte. For Dave Torkanowski and Walter Wolfman, Trombone Shorty, and the whole Andrews clan, and the Marcellus clan, and the Baptiste clan too. Charmaine Neville, this poem's for you, and don't forget Kid Jordan, the whole Jordan crew. It's for Philip Manuel and Leah Chase, Earl and Riley on drums, Roland Garrett on bass. Holla if you hear me. It's for Corey Henry on trombone, Kirk Joseph on sousaphone, Donald Harrison on sax. I take off my hat to Benny Jones and Leroy Jones and all our musicians who came back home. This poem's for you. We'll work today if you play tonight. Sing us a song that make us alright. The sounds of your horns give us strength to fight. We'll gut the houses if you play your sax. We'll swing the hammer if you swing your axe. We'll work with haste as you play your drum. Please bring your bass and we'll have some fun. Run with the sounds as hot as the sun. Bum-bum-bum-bum, play your drum. Sun put down your gun, let's have some fun. Work during the day, but when the night time comes, oh, Lil Liza, Lil Liza, say. Check it.